She woke up that morning feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today was not just any day. She was flying to another city for her first internship. Her heart raced as she packed her bag carefully, making sure her notebook, laptop, and a few snacks were in order. She had been preparing for this moment for months, and now it was finally here. Her family wished her luck, hugged her tightly, and reminded her to stay confident. The taxi ride to the airport seemed to take longer than usual, and every passing moment made her both anxious and eager. As she entered the airport, the hustle and bustle of travelers filled the space. The smell of coffee, the chatter of families, and the rolling of suitcases created a sense of anticipation. She checked her boarding pass and ticket, navigating the long lines with patience. Although she had flown before, this trip felt different. She was carrying not just luggage but also her hopes and dreams. Walking toward the gate, she tried to calm herself, taking deep breaths. She noticed the flight attendants preparing the plane, the pilots in their crisp uniforms, and other passengers finding their seats. When it was finally time to board, she felt a rush of excitement. The plane was big, with rows of seats stretching as far as she could see. She found her seat, placed her bag in the overhead compartment, and settled in. She glanced around at the other passengers, some reading, some chatting, and some looking just as nervous as she felt. Across the aisle, she noticed a group of teenagers who seemed loud and restless. At first, she tried to ignore them, focusing on her notes and reviewing what she would say at her internship. But as the plane filled, she noticed them sneering and whispering, occasionally glancing her way. Something about their expressions made her uneasy. She reminded herself to stay calm. She had faced challenges before and had always managed to get through them. Today would be no different. The plane took off smoothly, the engines humming steadily as it lifted into the sky. She watched the city shrink below her, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. Her thoughts drifted to her internship, to the people she would meet, and to the tasks she would handle. She pictured herself succeeding, making a positive impression, and learning as much as she could. Her confidence began to grow with each passing minute. Suddenly, one of the teenagers leaned over and made a mocking comment about her hair and the way she looked. She froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. She felt the familiar sting of being judged and targeted, a feeling she had experienced before but never enjoyed. Her first instinct was to ignore them, to not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But the whispers turned into louder remarks, and soon, one of them tapped her shoulder and slapped her lightly. Shocked, she recoiled and held her hands to her cheeks. Passengers around them murmured in surprise, but no one moved immediately to intervene. She wanted to cry, wanted to tell someone, but instead, she took a deep breath and focused on staying composed. She remembered all the times she had been underestimated or teased. She remembered how she had stood up for herself before, and she reminded herself that this moment, as frightening as it was, would not define her. She could face this challenge, just like she faced all the others. The flight attendants noticed the commotion and approached, speaking calmly but firmly to the teenagers. Their presence gave her a small sense of relief, knowing she was not completely alone. A few passengers nearby whispered words of encouragement, and she could feel the tiny wave of support from strangers. She realized that courage sometimes came in small doses, and even a small gesture of help could make a difference. Despite the incident, she tried to redirect her attention. She opened her notebook and began jotting down ideas for her internship project. Writing helped her regain focus and control. She remembered her parents' words about staying strong and believing in herself. She knew that allowing fear or anger to take over would only give the bullies more power. She was determined not to let them ruin her journey. The plane continued its journey, the hum of the engines a constant background to her thoughts. She imagined herself arriving at her destination, walking into the office confidently, and meeting her mentors. She pictured herself explaining her ideas clearly, listening carefully, and learning as much as possible. Each positive thought helped her regain strength and calmness. Occasionally, the bullies would make another remark, but she ignored them, keeping her eyes on her notes and her mind on her goals. She could feel their frustration growing as their attempts to intimidate her failed. The plane was small enough that the tension was noticeable, but she remained poised. She realized that her own calmness was a powerful tool against their aggression. As the flight continued, she thought about her journey not just in terms of travel, but as a metaphor for life. The challenges she faced on this plane were similar to the obstacles she would encounter in her career and personal life. She understood that confidence, preparation, and resilience were her strongest allies. She also realized the importance of seeking support when needed, whether from authority figures, strangers, or friends. The hours passed, and she felt a growing sense of pride in herself. She had faced an unexpected challenge and had maintained her composure. Her mind was sharper, her determination stronger, and her focus clearer. She knew that this experience, though difficult, had made her stronger and more prepared for what lay ahead. By the time the plane began its descent, she felt a sense of calm triumph. She had made it through a difficult situation without losing her dignity or her sense of self. She looked out the window at the approaching city, feeling a mixture of excitement and readiness. The adventure that awaited her was still ahead, but she knew she had already proven something important. She could handle challenges with courage and grace. As the plane touched down, she gathered her belongings and prepared to step into a new chapter of her life. She knew the bullies were still present, but she no longer felt fear or anger. She felt empowered, confident, and ready to face whatever came next. The journey had begun not just with a flight, but with a test of her strength, resilience, and courage. She exited the plane, taking in the sights and sounds of the new city. Every step felt like a victory, every breath a reminder of her inner strength. She was ready for her internship, ready to learn, and ready to show the world that she would not be defined or deterred by the actions of others. The experience on the flight had been a challenge, but it had also been a lesson. Courage, composure, and determination could turn even the most difficult moments into triumphs. The flight continued, and she tried to calm herself, focusing on the anticipation of her internship. She had her notebook open, reviewing important notes and strategies for her first day. The city below was a patchwork of buildings and roads, a reminder of the journey she was on both physically and mentally. The sunlight streamed through the window, giving her a sense of warmth and hope. Despite the earlier incident, she told herself she would not let this moment shake her confidence. But the teenagers across the aisle were not finished. One of them leaned back and whispered something rude, loud enough for her to hear. Another giggled, clearly enjoying the attention they were giving her. She felt the familiar sting of discomfort, but she refused to react immediately. She knew that showing anger or fear would only give them more power. Instead, she took a deep breath, trying to focus on her goals and the positive reasons she was traveling. She glanced around the cabin, noticing other passengers. Some were watching the situation with curiosity, while others were focused on their devices or conversations. A few parents looked concerned, and one passenger in particular gave her a reassuring smile. That small gesture reminded her that not everyone would stand by and watch quietly. There were people willing to support her if needed. It was a small comfort, but it helped her maintain her composure. The bullies began to escalate. One of them stood up briefly, blocking part of the aisle, and made a mocking gesture. Another leaned over and poked her shoulder again, this time harder. She flinched, but instead of shouting or crying, she stood her ground. She remembered the advice her parents and mentors had given her about standing firm and not letting others control her emotions. She focused on her breathing, keeping calm despite the tension. Suddenly, one of the flight attendants approached. She had been observing the situation and now stepped in with a calm but firm voice. She asked the teenagers to return to their seats and reminded them of the rules of conduct on the plane. The teenagers initially scoffed, but the presence of the flight attendant made them hesitate. Her heart lifted slightly, knowing that she now had authority on her side. The flight attendant stayed nearby, ensuring that no further incidents occurred immediately. While the immediate threat was managed, she still felt uneasy. The bullies muttered under their breath, clearly frustrated by the intervention. She turned back to her notebook, using writing as a way to calm her mind. Writing allowed her to regain control, to remind herself of her purpose and the exciting opportunities awaiting her at the internship. Each word she wrote helped her feel stronger, more focused, and more in charge of her emotions. She thought about how life often presented challenges when least expected. This flight, which should have been a smooth and exciting journey, had turned into a test of patience and courage. But she reminded herself that obstacles like these were temporary and could be overcome with calmness and determination. Her focus on the internship, her goals, and her personal growth helped her maintain perspective. Minutes passed, and the tension in the cabin began to subside slightly. The bullies sat back down, though still whispering to each other. She noticed a few passengers keeping an eye on the situation, their silent support making her feel less alone. She realized that sometimes courage came not only from within but also from recognizing that others were willing to stand beside you when needed. Despite the uneasy calm, she could feel the tension lingering in the air. The teenagers occasionally glared at her, clearly irritated that their previous attempts had not succeeded. She focused on her notebook again, writing ideas and strategies for her internship. With each note, she reminded herself that her dreams and ambitions were more important than any temporary discomfort. Her focus on the future gave her strength and confidence. Time moved slowly, and she reflected on the importance of resilience. She thought about her past experiences and how she had overcome smaller challenges. Each obstacle had taught her patience, courage, and self-control. She realized that this moment, though difficult, was another step in her personal growth. It was a reminder that she could face adversity and emerge stronger. She noticed the flight attendants moving through the cabin, checking on passengers and ensuring safety. One of them paused by her seat and smiled reassuringly. That small acknowledgement gave her a sense of security. She knew that help was available if needed, and that strengthened her resolve. She also understood that standing up for herself did not mean being aggressive. It meant maintaining dignity, composure, and awareness. The bullies continued to whisper among themselves, plotting their next move. She sensed their frustration growing as they realized she would not respond with fear or anger. She could see their confidence starting to crack, which gave her a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew that her calmness was their greatest challenge, and she intended to maintain it. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from previous experiences with bullies. Ignoring provocation, seeking support from authorities, and staying focused on personal goals had always been effective. She realized that these principles applied not only on this flight but also in life. Her mindset was her most powerful tool, and she intended to use it wisely. As the flight progressed, she began to feel a renewed sense of determination. She would not let these teenagers dictate her experience or ruin her journey. She imagined arriving at her internship, confident and ready to learn. That vision helped her maintain focus, despite the tension in the cabin. Each minute that passed without incident was a small victory, reinforcing her resilience. The passengers around her continued to offer subtle support, whether through kind gestures, smiles, or quiet attention. She felt a sense of community, even among strangers. It reminded her that support could come from unexpected places, and that courage was often amplified when others were willing to act with kindness and awareness. She thought about the future and the importance of perspective. This flight, though challenging, was temporary. Her internship and the opportunities that awaited her were far more significant. She reminded herself that focusing on her goals would help her navigate the current situation with grace and composure. The small act of staying calm and focused was a victory in itself. Eventually, the bullies seemed to recognize that their attempts were failing. Their whispers grew quieter, their gestures less bold. She could sense their frustration and discomfort, which gave her quiet satisfaction. She understood that standing firm and refusing to react to provocation was a powerful form of resistance. She felt proud of her ability to remain composed and strong. The flight continued smoothly, and she began to relax slightly, allowing herself to enjoy the view outside the window. The city below looked different from above, a reminder that perspective could change everything. She realized that maintaining perspective in difficult situations was essential. The bullies' actions, while unpleasant, did not define her or her journey. She thought about the support she had received, from the flight attendants, fellow passengers, and even the small gestures of kindness from strangers. It reminded her that courage was not always about facing challenges alone. Sometimes it was about recognizing when support was available and allowing it to strengthen you. She felt grateful for the presence of these unseen allies. As the flight continued, she remained focused on her internship, her personal growth, and her dreams. Each moment of composure, each decision to ignore provocation, reinforced her confidence. She knew that she was capable of handling adversity, both on this flight and in the larger journey of life. The experience was teaching her resilience, patience, and the power of maintaining dignity under pressure. By the time the plane began its descent, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced harassment and intimidation and had remained composed. She had used her focus, her determination, and the support of others to navigate the situation successfully. She realized that the experience, while difficult, had strengthened her resolve and confidence. She gathered her belongings, preparing to disembark. She knew that the bullies were still nearby, but she no longer felt fear or anger. She felt empowered, knowing that she had maintained her composure and dignity. The journey was not over, but she had already proven to herself that she could handle challenges with courage and resilience. As she stepped off the plane, she took a deep breath, feeling the excitement of a new city and new opportunities. Each step was a reminder of her inner strength and her ability to face adversity with grace. She knew that the experience on the flight would stay with her, but it would serve as a lesson in courage, focus, and self-confidence. The journey had tested her, but she had emerged stronger and ready to face the next chapter of her life. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, she settled back into her seat, trying to focus on the positive aspects of her journey. She knew the next few hours would be crucial not just for traveling but for maintaining her calm and self-confidence. She opened her notebook and began making notes about what she wanted to achieve at her internship. Each word she wrote reinforced her determination and reminded her of the purpose behind this trip. The earlier incident with the bullies still lingered in her mind, but she refused to let it control her emotions. The teenagers across the aisle were clearly frustrated that she had not reacted as they had expected. One of them tapped his foot loudly, while another muttered under his breath, trying to get her attention. She looked up briefly, meeting their eyes with calm determination. She did not smile, did not scowl. She simply held her gaze and returned to her notebook. That simple act, subtle as it was, made them shift uncomfortably. They were used to getting reactions, and her refusal to provide one was disarming. Her thoughts drifted to her past experiences, times when she had faced unfair treatment or teasing. She remembered moments when staying calm had turned situations around. She reminded herself that patience and strategy often worked better than confrontation. She focused on breathing deeply, keeping her body relaxed, and maintaining an alert mind. Her ability to stay composed was her silent strength. The plane's cabin was quiet for the most part, punctuated by the occasional chatter of other passengers or the rolling of carts. She noticed a few flight attendants watching the situation from a distance, ready to step in if needed. Knowing that authority figures were nearby gave her reassurance. She also realized that sometimes courage was not about immediate action but about staying prepared and confident while waiting for the right moment. Suddenly, one of the teenagers leaned over and made a snide comment about her appearance. She felt a moment of irritation, but she quickly pushed it aside. She reminded herself that her worth was not determined by their words. Instead of reacting, she calmly closed her notebook for a moment, took a sip of water, and looked out the window. The view of the clouds and the endless sky reminded her of perspective, how small this moment would be compared to her larger journey. She noticed a middle-aged passenger a few rows ahead giving her a supportive nod. That small gesture reminded her that she was not alone. Even strangers could offer encouragement in subtle ways, and it strengthened her resolve. She realized that resilience was not just about individual strength. It was also about recognizing and accepting support when it was offered. The bullies seemed to notice her composed demeanor and exchanged frustrated glances. Their attempts to provoke her had failed, and they were starting to lose confidence. She could sense their discomfort, and it gave her a quiet sense of satisfaction. She understood that remaining calm was more effective than any outburst or retaliation. Her focus was on her own goals, and that focus was unshakable. Minutes turned into an hour, and she continued to write notes and plan for her internship. Each line she wrote reinforced her confidence. She thought about the projects she would handle, the people she would meet, and the skills she would gain. She imagined walking into the office with poise and determination, ready to learn and contribute. The thought of her future helped her remain grounded in the present. One of the teenagers suddenly reached over and tapped her shoulder, trying to get a reaction. She flinched but did not turn to face them. Instead, she took a deep breath and shifted slightly, making it clear that their attempt had no effect. The other passengers in the row started to notice, and a few of them whispered words of support. She felt a sense of empowerment knowing that she was not alone and that standing her ground was being recognized. The flight attendants moved closer, monitoring the situation. One of them quietly signaled to the teenagers, reminding them that their behavior was unacceptable. The teenagers muttered complaints but sat back down, clearly irritated by the lack of attention they were receiving. She smiled slightly to herself, knowing that calm confidence often worked better than confrontation. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from previous experiences. Ignoring provocation, maintaining composure, and focusing on her own goals had always been effective. She understood that these principles applied not only in this situation but also in life. She felt grateful for the ability to think clearly under pressure and for the support of others, even if it was subtle and indirect. The hours passed and she felt a growing sense of strength. Each minute of composure, each decision to focus on her goals rather than on the bullies, reinforced her confidence. She realized that the real victory was in maintaining her dignity and self-respect. The bullies' attempts to intimidate her had failed, and that failure empowered her. She began to observe the cabin more closely, noticing small details, the way the flight attendants moved, the expressions of other passengers, and the changing light from the windows. This awareness helped her stay grounded and calm. She understood that paying attention to her surroundings, staying alert, and being prepared for any situation was an essential part of staying safe and confident. The bullies were whispering among themselves, clearly frustrated by their lack of success. She sensed that they were starting to doubt themselves, and that shift in energy gave her a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew that confidence and composure could influence the behavior of others without the need for aggression. She felt proud of her ability to maintain control over her emotions. Her thoughts returned to the internship. She imagined introducing herself to her new colleagues, explaining her ideas clearly, and learning as much as possible. That visualization gave her energy and motivation. She knew that focusing on positive outcomes, rather than dwelling on negative experiences, was a powerful tool for resilience and success. As the flight continued, she noticed that a few passengers were keeping a closer eye on the situation. Some of them offered subtle support through glances and small gestures. She felt reassured that she was not alone and that help could come in many forms. That realization strengthened her resolve to remain calm and focused. The bullies made a few more attempts to get her attention, but she ignored them completely. Her calm demeanor and refusal to react were gradually turning the situation in her favor. She understood that staying composed was a form of power, and she wielded it effectively. She felt a sense of quiet triumph as she maintained control over her own experience. She reflected on the importance of perspective. The plane, the bullies, and the temporary discomfort were small compared to her long-term goals and ambitions. She reminded herself that challenges were temporary, and that focusing on her objectives would help her navigate them successfully. This mindset helped her maintain calm and clarity. Eventually, the bullies seemed to realize that their efforts were failing. Their whispers grew quieter, and their gestures less bold. She could sense their frustration, and it gave her confidence. She understood that her composure was the key to this small victory. She felt proud of herself for staying calm, focused, and strong. The flight attendants continued to monitor the cabin, ensuring that everyone was safe and comfortable. Their presence was reassuring, and she felt grateful for their intervention. She also understood that seeking help when necessary was not a weakness but a smart and responsible choice. She had maintained her dignity while allowing authority figures to assist if needed. She returned to her notes, writing carefully and thoughtfully. Each word reinforced her goals and ambitions. She felt a sense of control over her own journey, knowing that her focus and determination could not be shaken by temporary challenges. She was confident that the internship would be a valuable experience, and she was ready to approach it with energy and dedication. As the plane began its descent, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced intimidation and harassment and had remained composed. She had focused on her goals, used her support system wisely, and maintained her dignity throughout the situation. The experience had strengthened her resilience and confidence. She gathered her belongings, preparing to disembark. She knew that the bullies were still present, but she no longer felt fear or anger. She felt empowered, confident, and ready to face the next chapter of her journey. The flight had been challenging, but it had also been a lesson in courage, composure, and self-respect. Stepping off the plane, she took a deep breath, feeling the excitement of arriving in a new city and the opportunities that awaited her. Each step was a reminder of her strength and resilience. She knew that this experience, while difficult, had prepared her for future challenges. She was ready to continue her journey with confidence, determination, and a renewed sense of purpose. The plane continued its steady journey through the sky, and she tried to focus on the positive. She kept her notebook open, jotting down notes about her internship and strategies for success. She reminded herself that this flight, while uncomfortable, was temporary. Her thoughts were on the exciting possibilities ahead and the lessons she could take from this experience. But the tension across the aisle was palpable. The teenagers had grown restless, clearly annoyed that their previous attempts to intimidate her had failed. One of them suddenly stood up, blocking part of the aisle. His movements were aggressive, designed to draw attention. He leaned over her seat, speaking loudly, trying to make a scene. She felt a jolt of fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. She looked straight ahead, ignoring him, and focused on her notes. Her heart raced, but she knew that reacting with fear or anger would give them power. Instead, she drew on her inner strength and determination. The other teenagers whispered among themselves, clearly frustrated. Their attempts to provoke her had not only failed but also made them increasingly uncomfortable. She noticed a few passengers shifting in their seats, watching closely. Some whispered to each other, while others discreetly recorded the scene on their phones. She felt a quiet sense of support, realizing that she was not alone. Even without direct intervention, the presence of attentive witnesses made a difference. Her mind raced through possible ways to stay safe while maintaining her composure. She had learned from past experiences that clear thinking and patience were more powerful than confrontation. She took slow, deep breaths, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She reminded herself that this moment was temporary and that she had already demonstrated courage by standing her ground. Suddenly, one of the bullies reached out and tapped her shoulder again, harder this time. She flinched but did not turn to face him. She took another deep breath and adjusted her seating slightly, making it clear without words that his actions had no effect. The teenagers looked at each other, confusion and frustration written across their faces. Their confidence was beginning to crumble, and she felt a sense of quiet victory. The flight attendants had noticed the escalation and moved closer. One of them stood by her row, speaking firmly to the teenagers. Their whispers and gestures began to quiet down. They realized that the authority of the flight attendants meant that their aggressive behavior could no longer continue unchecked. She felt a sense of relief knowing that the situation was being handled professionally and that she had support. Even with the immediate threat reduced, the tension remained in the cabin. She focused on her notes, writing carefully, using the act of writing as a tool to maintain her calm. Each word she wrote reminded her of her purpose and goals. She thought about the internship, the people she would meet, and the skills she would learn. The vision of her future gave her energy and kept her grounded. The bullies whispered to each other, their frustration growing as they realized their attempts were failing. She observed their changing body language, the way they shifted in their seats, and the way their eyes darted around the cabin. She understood that her calm and composed demeanor was influencing them more than any verbal argument could. The power of her poise was greater than their aggression. She reflected on her past experiences with difficult people and situations. She remembered times when she had faced challenges and had emerged stronger. Each lesson she had learned was now helping her navigate this moment. She realized that maintaining dignity, staying focused, and using calmness as a shield were her most effective tools. The bully's frustration only reinforced her confidence. Minutes passed, and she began to notice a subtle shift in the cabin. Other passengers were now more attentive, some whispering words of encouragement, some watching silently. She felt a quiet sense of solidarity. Even strangers could provide support without direct intervention. She understood that courage could be amplified when others were willing to observe, acknowledge, or subtly assist. The teenagers made another attempt to grab her attention, leaning over slightly and muttering insults. She did not flinch or react. Instead, she slowly closed her notebook, placed her hands calmly on her lap, and looked out the window. The sky outside was a vast, endless blue, and the clouds floated by peacefully. The view reminded her of perspective, how small this conflict was in the larger picture of her journey. Her calm presence was disarming, and the bullies began to retreat, their attempts losing strength. She reflected on the importance of strategy in difficult situations. Reacting emotionally might have given them temporary satisfaction, but it would not have changed the outcome. By staying composed, she maintained control over herself and the situation. She realized that resilience and patience were forms of power, often more effective than confrontation. The flight attendants continued to circulate, ensuring the cabin remained calm. One of them gave her a reassuring smile, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. That small gesture reinforced her determination. She knew that asking for help or accepting support did not diminish her courage. It complemented it. The situation was being handled, but her inner strength remained the cornerstone of her confidence. She returned to her notes, focusing on the projects she would handle at her internship. Writing helped her process the experience and channel her energy into something productive. Each note was a reminder of her purpose and a step toward her future. She felt empowered by the knowledge that she was using this challenging moment to strengthen her resolve and focus on her goals. The bullies seemed to realize that their actions were futile. Their whispers became quieter, and their gestures less pronounced. She could sense their growing discomfort and self-doubt. The power dynamics had shifted subtly but clearly. She felt a sense of quiet triumph, knowing that her calm and focused demeanor had turned the situation in her favor. She reflected on the lessons learned. Maintaining composure under pressure, seeking support when necessary, and staying focused on goals were essential skills. She realized that this moment, though uncomfortable, was a valuable experience in resilience and personal growth. She felt proud of herself for handling the situation with dignity and intelligence. As the flight continued, she observed the changing light from the windows, the shifting patterns of clouds, and the expressions of passengers around her. Paying attention to these details helped her remain grounded and present. She understood that awareness and mindfulness were important tools for managing stress and staying composed in challenging situations. The teenagers made a few more minor attempts to provoke her, but she ignored them completely. Her calm and steady presence was now a source of quiet authority. She felt empowered knowing that she could influence the situation without aggression. Each moment of composure reinforced her confidence and strengthened her sense of self. She thought about the importance of perspective and long-term goals. The temporary discomfort on this flight was small compared to the opportunities and experiences awaiting her at her internship. She reminded herself to focus on what truly mattered and to use this challenge as a lesson in resilience and patience. Her mindset was her most powerful tool. Eventually, the bullies seemed to give up their attempts entirely. Their whispers ceased, their gestures relaxed, and their confidence visibly diminished. She had maintained control over her emotions and actions, and the power of calm composure had shifted the dynamics in her favor. she felt a quiet sense of victory and satisfaction. The flight attendants continued to monitor the cabin, ensuring safety and calm. She felt grateful for their presence and professionalism. She understood that seeking help and allowing authority figures to intervene when necessary was a wise and responsible choice. Her courage had been complemented by their support, creating a safe environment. She returned to her notes, writing carefully and thoughtfully. Each word reinforced her focus and determination. She felt a sense of control over her own experience, knowing that her calmness and strategy were effective. She was ready to face her internship with confidence, knowing that she had already navigated a challenging situation successfully. As the plane began its descent, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced intimidation and harassment and had remained composed. She had focused on her goals, used the support of others wisely, and maintained her dignity throughout the ordeal. The experience had strengthened her resilience and confidence. She gathered her belongings, preparing to disembark. She knew that the bullies were still present, but she no longer felt fear or anger. She felt empowered, confident, and ready to face the next chapter of her journey. The flight had been challenging, but it had also been a lesson in courage, composure, and self-respect. Stepping off the plane, she took a deep breath, feeling the excitement of arriving in a new city and the opportunities that awaited her. Each step was a reminder of her strength and resilience. She knew that this experience, while difficult, had prepared her for future challenges. She was ready to continue her journey with confidence, determination, and a renewed sense of purpose. The plane continued to fly steadily, and she tried to focus on her notes and her thoughts about the internship. Each word she wrote was a step toward regaining her sense of calm and purpose. She had already maintained her composure through the bullies' attempts, and now she wanted to stay strong until the journey ended. But she could sense that the tension was not completely gone. The teenagers across the aisle were still watching her, their frustration simmering just below the surface. One of them shifted in his seat, leaning closer in an attempt to intimidate her. She felt a twinge of unease but reminded herself to stay calm. She took a slow, deep breath and adjusted her position in the seat, signaling without words that she was not afraid. The subtle act of standing her ground made the bully hesitate. He was not used to this kind of quiet resistance, and it seemed to confuse him. She observed the other passengers, noticing a few who had been quietly supportive throughout the flight. Some whispered words of encouragement to each other, while others gave her small nods or smiles. Their presence gave her a sense of reassurance. She realized that courage could be strengthened by the knowledge that others were aware and supportive, even if they were not directly intervening. It reminded her that she was not alone in facing difficult situations. The bullies began whispering among themselves, clearly frustrated by their inability to provoke a reaction. One of them muttered something under his breath, while another made a restless movement in his seat. She focused on her breathing and kept her attention on her notebook. Writing had become a tool for grounding herself, a way to channel her energy into something productive and positive. Each word she wrote was a reminder of her purpose and the goals she wanted to achieve. As the flight continued, one of the bullies made a sudden move, reaching toward her in an attempt to grab her notebook. She reacted quickly, pulling it back and holding it close. Her eyes met his with a calm but firm stare. The sudden resistance caught him off guard. He had expected fear or submission, not quiet defiance. The other teenagers looked at him, unsure of what to do next. Their confidence was beginning to falter. A flight attendant approached again, noticing the minor escalation. She spoke to the teenagers firmly, reminding them of the rules and making it clear that their behavior would not be tolerated. The presence of authority had an immediate effect. The teenagers muttered complaints but returned to their seats, their confidence shaken. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that support was available when needed, but she remained composed and focused on her own actions. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from previous experiences. Maintaining composure, focusing on goals, and using calmness as a tool were strategies that had always worked for her. She realized that the real power in this situation was not in reacting to provocation but in controlling her own emotions. By staying calm, She had turned the situation to her advantage. She felt proud of herself for staying strong and poised. Minutes passed, and the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. Other passengers were now paying closer attention, some offering subtle gestures of support. She could sense that the bullies were losing their grip on the situation. Their movements were less aggressive, and their whispers quieter. The power dynamics were changing, and she could feel the shift. She had maintained control over herself, and now the bullies were beginning to lose control. She turned her attention back to her internship notes, writing carefully and thoughtfully. Each word reminded her of her purpose and helped her maintain focus. She imagined arriving at her internship, confident and ready to learn. That vision gave her strength and motivation. She knew that focusing on positive outcomes, rather than dwelling on negative experiences, was the key to resilience and success. The bullies made a few minor gestures, but they were clearly weaker than before. Their confidence had eroded, and she could sense their frustration. She remained calm, aware that any reaction from her could still give them power. Instead, she focused on her own goals and actions. Each moment of composure reinforced her confidence and sense of control. She observed the cabin closely, noting the expressions and movements of the passengers. Paying attention to her surroundings helped her stay grounded and prepared for any sudden changes. She understood that awareness was an essential part of staying safe and confident. By staying alert, she could respond effectively if necessary, while also maintaining her composure. The teenagers whispered to each other, their frustration growing. She sensed that they were starting to realize their attempts to intimidate her had failed completely. Her calmness had disarmed them, and their confidence was crumbling. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that her strategy of staying composed and focused was working. She understood that real strength often came from patience, awareness, and self-control. She reflected on the importance of perspective. The temporary discomfort on this flight was small compared to the opportunities and experiences awaiting her at her internship. She reminded herself to focus on what truly mattered and to use this challenge as a lesson in resilience and determination. Her mindset was her most powerful tool, and she intended to use it wisely. As the plane continued its journey, she noticed subtle changes in the bullies' behavior. Their whispers became quieter, and their gestures less pronounced. They no longer attempted direct provocation. The power dynamics had shifted, and she could feel it. Her calmness, focus, and determination had turned the situation in her favor. She felt a quiet sense of victory and pride in her ability to navigate the challenge successfully. The flight attendants continued to circulate, ensuring the cabin remained calm and safe. She felt grateful for their presence and professionalism. She understood that seeking help when necessary was not a weakness but a smart and responsible choice. Her courage and composure had been complemented by their support, creating a safe and controlled environment. She returned to her notes, writing carefully and thoughtfully. Each word reinforced her focus and determination. She felt a sense of control over her own experience, knowing that her calmness and strategy were effective. She was ready to face her internship with confidence, knowing that she had already navigated a challenging situation successfully. As the plane began its descent, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced intimidation and harassment and had remained composed. She had focused on her goals, used the support of others wisely, and maintained her dignity throughout the ordeal. The experience had strengthened her resilience and confidence. She gathered her belongings, preparing to disembark. She knew that the bullies were still present, but she no longer felt fear or anger. She felt empowered, confident, and ready to face the next chapter of her journey. The flight had been challenging, but it had also been a lesson in courage, composure, and self-respect. Stepping off the plane, she took a deep breath, feeling the excitement of arriving in a new city and the opportunities that awaited her. Each step was a reminder of her strength and resilience. She knew that this experience, while difficult, had prepared her for future challenges. She was ready to continue her journey with confidence, determination, and a renewed sense of purpose. The plane began its final descent, and she could feel the excitement building inside her. She had maintained her composure through the entire flight, faced intimidation, and handled herself with dignity. The city below was coming into view, and she felt a mixture of anticipation and relief. She glanced around at the passengers, some of whom had been quietly supportive, and felt a wave of gratitude. Their presence, even in small ways, had made a difference. The teenagers who had tried to intimidate her were now noticeably subdued. Their earlier confidence was gone, replaced with frustration and uncertainty. It was clear that their attempts had failed, and she could sense the shift in the cabin. The balance of power had changed without a single harsh word or aggressive move from her. Her calm, focused demeanor had spoken louder than any confrontation could have. She reflected on the journey, realizing how much she had grown in those few hours. She had faced fear and uncertainty and had emerged stronger and more confident. She understood that courage was not always about loud or dramatic actions, but often about quiet strength, patience, and maintaining control over one's emotions. This experience had been a powerful lesson in resilience. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, ensuring passengers were prepared for landing. One of them paused by her seat and gave her a knowing smile, acknowledging her composure and bravery. She felt a small but meaningful sense of recognition. It reminded her that even in difficult moments, support and understanding could come from unexpected places. She appreciated the professionalism and calm presence of the crew, which had helped create a safe environment. She began to pack her belongings carefully, checking her seat area and making sure her bag and notebook were secure. The act of organizing her things helped her focus and maintain calm. She felt a sense of readiness, not just for the landing but for the next chapter of her life. The experience on the flight had prepared her for challenges, showing her that inner strength and focus could overcome difficult situations. As the plane touched down, she felt a surge of relief and accomplishment. She had navigated a tense and challenging environment without losing her composure. She had handled the bullies' intimidation calmly and effectively, proving to herself that she could face adversity with strength and dignity. The experience had reinforced her confidence in herself and her ability to manage difficult situations. Passengers began to gather their belongings, and the bullies looked around nervously. Their earlier aggression had been replaced with quiet unease. She noticed a few passengers whispering and nodding toward her, acknowledging the way she had handled the situation. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her calmness had not only protected her, but had also influenced the environment around her. She stood up, adjusting her bag and taking a deep breath. The aisle was crowded, but she moved steadily, maintaining her composure. She felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that she had turned a potentially negative situation into a demonstration of her resilience and strength. Each step toward the exit of the plane was a reminder of her courage and determination. The teenagers had slumped in their seats, no longer attempting to provoke her. She could sense their frustration and defeat. It was a subtle but clear victory. She had demonstrated that composure, focus, and inner strength were more powerful than aggression and intimidation. The lesson was clear. Staying true to oneself and maintaining dignity could overcome even the most challenging situations. She walked through the cabin, noting the supportive glances from passengers and the professionalism of the flight attendants. Their quiet presence had provided a foundation of safety and reassurance. She realized that courage often involved a combination of personal strength and the willingness to accept help when available. She had navigated the situation wisely, using both her inner resources and the support around her. As she exited the plane, the city stretched out before her, bustling with energy and opportunity. The airport was filled with travelers, each absorbed in their own journey, but she felt a unique sense of accomplishment. She had faced a challenge head-on and emerged with confidence intact. The experience on the flight had been a test of her resilience, and she had passed with strength and grace. She moved toward the terminal, her steps steady and purposeful. Her mind replayed the events of the flight, reflecting on how she had remained calm and focused despite the bullying. She recognized the power of her mindset and the importance of perspective. Temporary discomfort and intimidation could be overcome with patience, awareness, and determination. She thought about the upcoming days at her internship, feeling a renewed sense of excitement. She was ready to meet new people, learn new skills, and contribute positively. The confidence she had gained from handling the flight situation would carry over into her professional life. She felt prepared to face challenges with the same calm and strategic approach she had used on the plane. Her parents were waiting at the arrival area, smiling and ready to welcome her. Their pride and support added to her sense of accomplishment. She hugged them tightly, feeling a sense of connection and reassurance. They asked her about the flight, and she explained calmly how she had handled the situation with the bullies. They listened attentively, clearly impressed by her composure and strength. The walk to the car was filled with conversation about the internship and the new city. She felt a sense of readiness and anticipation. The earlier challenges on the plane no longer felt like obstacles but as experiences that had strengthened her. She understood that life would continue to present difficult situations, but she now had a clear example of how to navigate them successfully. As they drove toward the city center, she looked out the window, watching the buildings and streets pass by. Each moment reinforced her sense of purpose and determination. She knew that her ability to remain calm, focused, and resilient would serve her well in both personal and professional settings. The flight had been a microcosm of life's challenges, teaching her lessons in courage, patience, and strategic thinking. She reflected on the importance of inner strength and self-belief. The bullies had tried to assert power over her, but she had maintained control over herself. She had used composure and awareness as tools to navigate a tense situation successfully. The experience had reinforced her understanding that true strength often came from within and could not be taken away by external forces. The arrival at her accommodation marked the beginning of her internship journey. She felt a sense of readiness and optimism. The challenges of the flight were behind her, leaving her with lessons in resilience and confidence. She knew that she could face future challenges with the same calm and strategic approach. She unpacked her belongings and organized her space, feeling a sense of control and preparation. The lessons from the flight stayed with her, a reminder that calmness, focus, and self-respect were powerful tools. She was determined to carry these lessons into her internship and beyond, knowing that they would serve her well in all aspects of life. That evening, she reflected on the journey. The flight had been challenging, filled with tension and intimidation, but she had handled it with grace and composure. She had maintained her focus on her goals, used support wisely, and emerged stronger. The experience was a powerful reminder of her resilience and the strength of her character. As she prepared for the next day, she felt confident and ready. The challenges she had faced had become lessons in courage, strategy, and self-belief. She was prepared to approach her internship with energy, focus, and determination, knowing that she had already overcome a significant challenge. The flight had been more than a journey through the air. It had been a journey of personal growth and empowerment. She went to bed that night feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The events of the flight had tested her, but she had emerged stronger, more confident, and ready for the opportunities ahead. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she now had a clear example of how to face them successfully. Her inner strength, focus, and composure were her greatest allies, and she was determined to use them wisely in all future endeavors. The next morning, she woke up feeling refreshed and prepared. The city outside was alive with possibilities, and she felt ready to embrace them. She reflected on the lessons learned from the flight, understanding that resilience, patience, and strategic thinking were essential in navigating life's challenges. She carried these lessons with her as she stepped into the next chapter of her journey, confident in her ability to face any obstacle with strength and grace.